Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
In the next few days, it'll be the one-year anniversary of the White Nationalist Rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, that took the life of Heather Heyer. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The sight of Nazi flags and the Tiki Torchlight March that reminded one of the 1930s Germany has now passed into history, but the alt-right is still here. Clashes at a recent rally in Portland, Oregon. There will be no march by them in Charlottesville this year, but alt-right leader Jason Kessler has vowed to press on with a rally in Washington, D.C. this Sunday to mark the anniversary. Take a look at where we are in our studio this morning. Kirkland Hall, the former president of the local NAACP branch, as well as now running as a candidate, a Democrat, for the delegate seat in Maryland's District 38A. And also Michelle Innes with the Tri-Community Mediation here in Salisbury. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So first of all, I'm going to start with you, with Kirkland. What are your thoughts here on the anniversary of this event that took everyone by surprise, I think, in some fashion? And, of course, we had the president's response and everything that sort of followed from that. Where do you think we are a year from
Well,
now?
personally, I think the members or the organizers and individuals that participate in that event are a little more emboldened now. I'm quite sure they're a little apprehensive a year ago how the public would respond. But once they got affirmative from the President of the United States, I'm quite sure they feel emboldened, just like many of others in this country, that they could do and say anything regardless of who it impact or who it hurt. And I think the level of what I want to say meanness, and I don't like to use this term hatred, that has permeated this country now, I think it's escalating at a rapid pace.
Michelle, what are your thoughts a year out?
I agree. Unfortunately, with Kirkland, and I think there's rising. I think there's a rising tide, and I don't think it's limited to the white supremacist movement. I think there's a rising tide of an unwillingness to stand it any longer. I think it's, if we look at a full spectrum, I think the polar ends of a spectrum, perhaps, who would be inclined towards coming to arms with one another are definitely increasing. I also think that folks in the middle who perhaps have the prerogative of remaining detached and somewhat oblivious are uncomfortable in ways that are now undeniable and really compelling us to ask tough questions about what then are we to do.
How did we get here? We went from the first African-American president to now Donald Trump, who clearly has appealed to the racist end of the political spectrum. What changed? And are we looking at simply that this feeling in this particular portion of the population has been there all the time and simply risen to the top, or at least to our public consciousness, or is there something, do you think there's something more mobilizing going on that's growing rather than necessarily coming to the surface?
I think we have to go back a little further than President Barack Obama. If we go back to the Civil War, how families were divided, the North and the South. Then you fast forward to the Civil Rights Movement, how a division, again, in this country. Then there was the Brown versus Board of Education back in 1954, where schools had been integrated. And there were laws and policies forced on people. And even today, we have individuals still resentful that happened. Then there was affirmative action. People felt that they were being pushed over, especially the white population, felt that they were giving away jobs and opportunities they felt that they were entitled to. Then President Barack Obama came aboard. Again, African-American president, the first one, and there was quite a few people, especially I think the older generation, that resented the fact that we had a black president. And there was some who said he was not our president. Now, fast forward to Donald Trump, who's bombastic, who will say anything, who will denigrate any people, especially women and people of color. You call them dumb, you call them low IQ, and those are code words that some people just rally to. And now, as Michelle just mentioned, I'm afraid that there's going to be some violence because there are people that are resistant, feel that the government is not helping them. They have to take actions in their own hands, and that's what I'm worried about, especially this Sunday.
Michelle, I ran across a phrase which I was taken by the other night, which is that equality to privilege feels like oppression. And I might maybe add that maybe perhaps unconscious privilege, perhaps. You think that's part of the problem? That those who are more privileged in society, certainly the white end of the spectrum, nonetheless do not feel privileged? I mean, if you're a working guy and you're struggling along, you certainly don't feel privileged. What about that dynamic, that somebody is not conscious of what's going on the other side?
I think that the language that we use, and certainly terms like privilege, that resonate so deeply with some people and really speak to the experience of hopelessness. And for others, it becomes such a buzzword of feeling radically, wildly misunderstood, where people say, but I'm a good person and I'm not, or I grew up poor. There's so many challenges in terms of the language that we utilize right now on social media, in media in general, in conversation, where we tend to, from keyboards, hurl our thoughts at one another or our positions at one another, or when we have conversation, it's with like-minded individuals. And really, part of what I think is that equality, privilege, all of those terms, we've been working for 2 years now on community conversations on race, bringing together, it's small, 20 people at a time. We're on our 5th group where people are talking about their own experiences and awareness of race, and then slowly coming into larger conversations. It's probably not till the 4th or 5th session that we bring up a term like privilege, because we're trying to really allow space for people to have deep understanding. And I think that there's so much to it. There's so much to it for everyone. And my only sense of how we're going to move forward is if there gets to be some level of shared understanding for where people are coming from.
Do you think, Michelle, that the onset of social media in particular, and its anonymity for that matter, do you think that's intensified this divide or this distance? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the very project I was just talking about, Community Conversations on Race, curiously came about in response to a Facebook Live post, to like a rant, a sorry, not sorry kind of a piece, and then someone from the media reaching out. So I also think that social media can be, I've had people say things, post things, and I've said, this isn't the kind of conversation that I'm going to entertain in this forum, but if you'd like to sit down and get together, I think we have to take responsibility for our communication and the kind of conversations we host, and ask ourselves, what are the outcomes we're hoping to achieve? Are we trying to be the big person, splattering it, getting the most likes, or are we trying to really create a shared understanding?
Speaking of new media, one of the things that strikes me is the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and in part, it seems to me, has been sparked by our ability to now see in real time incidents involving the police and African Americans on film, and we can now draw our own conclusions as opposed to something being sort of filed out into like a police report and nobody really knows what's going on. Do you think technology is pulling, making this issue much more aware in terms of the national consciousness?
Definitely so. I think what has happened because of of course we call it the age of technology, social media, more people are aware of what's happening. You could tell someone something, and they may be reluctant to believe what you said. But even when people see things, sometimes subconsciously we see things the way we perceive it to be. And it does not necessarily have to be that way, because we're looking at it out of our own spectrum. But I think because of that, and Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and all those the movements that is going on in this country. And because of the media, more and more people are finding out the actual, what is actually going on in this country, and more people are getting involved. Even just, I'm running for House of Delegates, you mentioned earlier. We have a messaging some nights, and 3 or 4 of us get on the telephone and cell phone, not telephone, and talk about different things. We can also what's called Facebook, and shop people, and then you got Facebook, and there's so many ways to get information out. And because of that, more and more people are getting on board to the causes that they believe in. And I think that is causing some degree of difficulty because got to be open-minded. And Michelle mentioned the word conversation. We have all got to have that difficult conversation, express our feelings, but we've got to come to some type of understanding if we're ever going to change anything in this country. If we constantly button heads, there's always going to be controversy, there's going to be conflict, and no one's going to come to an agreement on basically any issue.
And I think it's, if I might add to that, I think it's not just having difficult conversations. I do believe that. I think it's checking ourselves and creating a different level of self-awareness. If we are only talking with the folks who are nodding in agreement with us, there is an inherent danger in that, living in these silos. When we look at this country, when you travel and see there's certain areas, and even in this community right now, and you look at how racially divided neighborhoods are in our community, names of streets that people of one race know and another do not even know exist. There are, unless there's this coming together, we only move out of polarity and being able to label one another when we become human to one another. And if we're not having conversation with one another and really sharing in one another's everydayness, we lose that opportunity.
Well, one of the flashpoints, it seems to me, over the last few years has been, of course, Confederate monuments, statues, and so on and so forth. Here in Salisbury, of course, we had a great battle over the Confederate general who was immortalized on a plaque. He apparently was actually involved in overseeing the prisons that held Union prisoners. But we also had the Talbot Boys, for instance, a statue there, which there was controversy. That one stayed well. What do you think that symbolizes, Kirk? What do you think that symbolizes in terms of the kind of division that we see? I mean, I've talked to actually a couple of people who supported the idea of having the Talbot Boys, the sign, and they say they don't want us to take away their history. That there's this polarizing sense about it. Does that symbolize the kind of divide you think that exists in this kind of community?
I think it definitely symbolizes the divide, but also what has happened, we pick and choose who want to immortalize. Civil War, 1865, and allegedly, I guess unless I have been misled, the North won their battle. So therefore, if the North won, to the victor gets the spoils. But we tend, especially on the shore, immortalize more of the Confederacy as opposed to Northern monuments. Now, if you can help me, name me a monument that immortalizes the Northern victors in this area, then I like to see it. But what has happened, the most heinous crimes you can think of, this Wanda, prison coming, and all those people that died. But yet, he becomes a hero. And then I'm finding out there were a number of Northern soldiers who lived for years in this community, and most of us don't know about them. There's no monument with a listing of their names so that people can be educated that they participated in the Civil War. So again, we pick and choose who want to immortalize. We pick and choose because it satisfies our own self-gratification that we get and feel that since that plaque is there, one side think they've won. Now the other side is trying to come up with methods and ways to convince them that the sign should not be there. It should be somewhere else. It should be in a museum, which I've stated on numerous occasions. I love museums. There's no problem having it in a museum. but I don't think it should be on public display.
Michelle?
We've facilitated some conversations on these subjects and with a variety of possible solutions of movement of monuments, of adding additional monuments, and part of what I think has been interesting and noteworthy is the timing of when monuments were placed, and we ask ourselves with any action, what's the outcome folks are hoping to achieve and why in particular moments. And so as the civil rights movement increased and gained traction, many Confederate monuments began to appear. And it seemed to be, and I think that's lost on many folks. So there's an additional piece of context. And I've heard folks and supported folks trying to express the importance of history, lest we forget, lest it be repeated, and then I've also gained an appreciation for having a full-bodied context. Like I've heard a variety of possible solutions. You want to have the monuments there, put up when it was erected and perhaps why. Put up additional monuments for people who like the full story. The full piece, even when you were talking about technology and policing, and is it helping to increase awareness? Perhaps, but unless we together are processing how that what's happening, we can all look at the same piece of footage and see something different, and it can validate our positions. Unless we're engaging with folks and creating a balanced and shared perception, we're not really going to walk away with a full or a complete understanding. I think the same is true with Confederate monuments. Is it creating a full and accurate understanding?
Well, because one of the things you mentioned a moment ago about when these things were put up, a number of them were actually put up there in the 1920s and 19-teens, which was a height of the Ku Klux Klan, and a lot of it was commemoration 50 years after the Civil War and so on and so forth. A much different period in which white supremacists, particularly outright, was being celebrated certainly in the South and here. So the question becomes, if you try to give a fuller understanding of how these monuments were put up, you're going to wind up telling somebody that, this was put up in support of the Ku Klux Klan. Are you a Klan supporter? I mean, that forces somebody to come to grips with a history that maybe they don't want to come to grips with, Michelle.
I don't think anyone's ever accused me of trying to make it too tidy or candy coating. I think that if we end up providing more information with which to wrestle, it's going to be appropriate, and it probably isn't going to kill us. Probably the only thing that will kill us is what actually does. And I would say there's a far greater danger in our continued ignorance as we're watching things escalate, and as unfortunately things may play out this weekend.
I think I recall reading that it was a group called the Daughters of Confederacy. I think that was a group who really galvanized this particular activity, and it was also used by others as a method of fear-mongering. With the Klan, who was at its peak during that particular time, you recall they marched on Washington, D.C., and thousands upon thousands marched on Washington, D.C. And again, because individuals knew about the history and knew why the Klan was organized. And now you got the Klan, now you got the monuments and all this other stuff, plaques and monuments and statues coming up. It's a method of fear, and also it's a method of not forgetting. And who's the benefited? Those who side with the Confederates feel that the war's still going on. And people's minds, individual minds, it's still going on.
Let me say, because one of the things that strikes me is that we certainly have a new awareness about racism and our past. So certainly one of the things we're coming to grips with in terms of the Confederate statues, and that this awareness, which has now come to the surface, is coming into conflict with the past. That people who identify, whether it's with the Confederacy or just white privilege or whatever it happens to be, that we see a couple of great tectonic plates, as it were, in terms of demographics. We all know that by 2040, no one will be a majority anymore. Do you think that's part of what we're looking at in terms of this sort of almost whiplash between Barack Obama on the one hand and then Donald Trump on the other? I mean, do you think that's part of this process that will work itself out?
I mentioned a couple of terms earlier, fear and also entitlement. You mentioned 2040. Most researchers say that the demographics of this country will be, the minority will be in the majority. There are individuals who are afraid of that change and ask themselves, what does that mean for me and my family? For instance, on Fox News, the lady Laura
Ingraham, yes.
The statement that she made yesterday about this country is not the country that we're proud of and will remain proud of based on the changes. And she named a couple of cities that had changed dramatically over the years. To me, as a human being, a person that grew up during the Jim Crow era, a person that experienced riding on the black school, going to a black high school, had to walk on one side of the street, couldn't drink in the water fountain, had to sit up in the balcony of the movie theater, had to go to the back for a sandwich. But still, there's no hate in my heart. I look at that as a sign of the times. And as you continue to grow and mature, I teach my kids and let them know that times are changing. And we got to prepare ourselves for the changes. We can't control it. I don't think we need to control who comes in this country. I'm a firm believer that go back in the context history of it. People come for various reasons. And I'm a firm believer. That's why I went to school. That's why I studied. Because I don't want to do the job that I did as a youth, working in the fields, day in and day out for peanuts. That's why I work so hard in high school. That's why I work hard in grad school. That's why I'm constantly learning. But we got to teach everyone that no one can take something from you. You got to earn what we get. So there's no something that's entitlement anymore. That shouldn't be. If Michelle and I were competing for the same job, the best person should get the job. Not because she's a female, not because I'm African-American male. It's because who's better qualified, who can do that job better. And of course, I know she do a job a lot better than I do, so I want to
Or
apply.
we could revamp the system. We could be co-directors of what perhaps we could just restructure it and start to question some of our systems, designs, and assumptions we make.
Okay.
Well, Michelle, it does seem to me that I mean, a lot of the focus has now been on immigrants. First, it was undocumented immigrants. Now we had Laura Ingraham talking about the legal immigration and so on. How do you deal with the idea that some people look at immigrants in general as a threat? I mean, in fact, I did a piece, I don't know, a number of years back, and I talked to people in the African American community. And one of the things, I can't remember who it was who said, from the NAACP, and said, well, you know, my heart goes out to these immigrants, but you're killing me because you're taking my jobs. You know, that's, I mean, how does one deal with that fear that people have, that somehow something's being taken away from them, whether it's immigration or it's affirmative action for that matter? A tough question. I know.
I keep coming back to the community conversations on race that we've been having, where folks are saying we need to expand this group. So we've had folks from the Haitian community really needing to have an increase in terms of Latino, Hispanic members of our community as participants. And part of it is about, I think part of it is about when there's a fear about limited resources and the way that we even view our approach. And I think that it's very easy for us to succumb to the labels. And it's exactly like Kirkland was talking about, this piece of, when we were talking about the language that we use and how we approach. I mean, I think that I personally tend to believe that I didn't deserve to be born with any particular citizenship. It happened. And I don't know of any of us, when we trace it back, who
all immigrants
who would have been here, right? Otherwise, and I think where we are now in these times it requires all of the pieces. It requires sound, thoughtful, and just legislation. It also, in the day-to-day, requires us showing up in our humanity. Even when I think about the social media conversations we talked about, police footage that we talked about, I mean, all of these pieces, we seem to bypass anything that's sacred. We seem to bypass our humanity. Like we're looking through it in this binary fashion for like playing a blame game rather than recognizing trauma, like someone's brother, father, sister, mother. Like I don't know how it is we're compartmentalizing those pieces, and I feel like that needs to be integrated. I think we need to look at resource management, assuredly. I think that in any of us in our lives, but we need to balance it with our humanity and recognize that people are sacred.
Finally, just a minute we have left. Kirk, are you optimistic we're going to get through this period?
Can I go back to one of the things
Sure,
you mentioned about, you talked to NAACP president who said that immigrants are coming and taking our jobs.
Right, that was the feeling he had.
Yeah,
I mean,
I would ask that individual, as a former NAACP president, what jobs are they taking that you feel you want? Look at the farmers in this country today who are suffering because of having people to work in the fields. Look at individuals in the seafood industry that are on the verge of closing down because they don't have help. So I'm trying to understand what job is it that they are taking that they want. Look at our medical profession. How many immigrants that are medical doctors that may save our lives, may save your lives. So it all depends on what profession you choose. Now, if they want to go back to where it was back in the 60s when we had to work in the fields, well and good. But we need those. I love fruit.
Right, but that,
Yeah, I love vegetables.
you're not going to go on the field to pick it out, right?
That's right.
Unless perhaps we pay people, unless we pay people differently in the laborers.
$15 an hour.
Well, then you're right. We've been talking with Kirkland Hall. He's the former president of the local NAACP chapter. Also, he's a Democratic candidate for delegate seat in Maryland's District 38A. Also, Michelle Ennis. She's executive director of the Tri-Community Mediation here in Salisbury. Appreciate you taking the time to stop by and chat with us.
Thank you. Good morning.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14.